My name is Lily. I am our community education specialist. I am here to kind of share some information on human trafficking and community awareness and how we go about that. So whenever we present on sensitive information, we like to give a little bit of a content warning just to be aware, making sure we take care of ourselves when we are digesting this information and do what is best for each of us. A little overview of what we are going to be talking about. We'll go through some common misconceptions and myths and facts about human trafficking, understand what we call our recognize, respond, refer model, and then go into the real details and grit of that and leave time for any questions. So when I'm engaging with audiences, we have these scenarios. In this first one, we're going to go through it and decide whether it's truth or myth and then kind of get into the details of that. In this example, we see a conversation between two people. They say, I feel like human trafficking doesn't happen here. From what I've seen on TV, it mostly happens in developing countries. And their friend says, because it's so far away, there's not much we can do to help. So this is a myth. In reality, trafficking happens all over the world, though the most common forms of trafficking can differ by country. The United States is one of the most active sex trafficking countries in the world, with trafficking occurring in all types of cities of all sizes in every state in the country. In this example, the individual says, I heard men and boys are trafficked as often as women and girls. And this one is in fact true. It is one of those things where there is such stigma that a lot of the reports that are taken and the studies that are found do not take in the same equivalent information. And so it is estimated that as many as half of the sex trafficking victims and survivors are male, even when a lot of the studies do not reflect those statistics. It also depends on the country and the type of exploitation that is happening, where these individuals will fall, but especially with LGBTQ boys and young men, they are particularly vulnerable to experiencing human trafficking. In this scenario, I'm sure I've never seen or met anyone who has been trafficked. I assume victims will be desperate to escape their trafficker and ask for help when they need it. The person says, I agree, people being trafficked are physically unable to leave or held against their will. And in this case, this is another myth. Trafficking can involve force, but it can also involve a lot of other things that might include manipulation or psychological tactics that keep people in a relationship even without chains and bounds holding them there. There's a lot of financial dependence and other things that keep someone isolated from their community and support system that keep people from sharing that information and reaching out for resources even when it looks like they have free will to do so. In this last example, we have trafficking is always or usually a violent crime. This is in fact a myth. A lot of those psychological means of tricking, defrauding, manipulating, or threatening someone to provide commercial or exploitative labor is really the basis of the dynamics of human trafficking. It is not limited to violent crimes. It also includes all these more subtle manipulations. So now we're going to get into the actual definition. So if it's not all those things, it's not all those myths, what really is it? We define human trafficking, and the United States federal and state law defines it as the use of force, fraud, or coercion to compel a person into commercial sex acts or labor against their will. The reason that we want to talk about this is because it is significantly underreported. In this one study that was done, out of the 100 cases that occurred, only 16% were reported. And of those 16%, only 6 made it into police records. So to put it in another way, 66% of victims do not tell anyone about their abuse until their adulthood, which averages the age of 52 years old. So we know that this is happening, and we know that it's going unreported, which is why we bring this information to people, because it often doesn't look like what they expect and can be happening in their communities. The way we go about talking to people about this is we use our 3 R's, our recognize, respond, refer, to kind of a little pneumatic reminder of how to go about recognizing, responding, and referring people to resources. For that recognize component, we start with a spectrum of sexual exploitation. It can look like a lot of different things. Not only is there the stereotype of someone being trafficked across borders, we consider that oftentimes human smuggling. What human trafficking really looks like, and I'm going to bounce around a little bit, is what we call our actions, means, and purpose model. So in order for human trafficking to be present, something from each of these categories needs to be present. The one exception of this is when minors are involved, since minors are not able to consent. Anytime a minor is involved in commercial sex, they are immediately experiencing human trafficking. Otherwise, we look at the actions, the means, and the purpose of an instance to determine whether it's human trafficking. Actions may look like inducing, recruiting, harboring, transporting, providing services, obtaining a certain action in order to force, commit fraud, or coerce someone into doing that act of either commercial sex or sex trafficking or labor and services that fall under that labor trafficking component. So we want to make sure this is highlighted so that when we look at examples like this of a bunch of different types of scenarios where people might be exchanging goods for sex or using it to obtain shelter, that we know that it's still the same dynamic, even as it looks a bunch of different ways. So in this spectrum, they kind of try to create a spectrum where it starts with an adult who sells sex to pay for college tuition. It seems like they have a lot of autonomy in it, but it may get a little more dangerous as it gets into a runaway who sells sex to buy food and shelter, or someone who keeps the profits but is threatened by or abused by a pimp, and kind of that stereotypical experience of prostitution. A promise of a job as a waitress, but once they arrive, they're taken to a bar and sold without their consent. There's a lot of scenarios in illicit massage parlors where if someone's identity information or like a passport might be taken, that limits them from doing anything or physically forced to stay, either with physical force or the taking away of identity, so you cannot leave without that or be able to successfully move on anywhere else. These are just a few examples. There are a lot of things that fall under this umbrella of human trafficking, but we just wanted to highlight a few here. We also want to specify that there are some specific youth demographics. I think what's most important here really is the chart. This is the age at time of sex or labor trafficking begins, and we see this huge spike at the ages of 15 to 17. And so we want to just make sure that we recognize that children make up 69% of victims in newly charged sex trafficking cases in 2020, with a 17% increase from the year before. And this is a slightly older statistic, but this already shows that the trends are super high in this case. The other important component of this that we kind of highlight throughout is that 45% of victims previously knew their trafficker before becoming a victim. So here we see the top 3 recruiter types. So the first and primary group, which takes up 33%, is a family member or caregiver. Oftentimes this can look like someone asking them to go to a hotel and meet their friend, do your family member a favor, go meet the local bishop or priest or whoever it may be and do favors. It might be an intimate partner or an employer. These are our top 3 recruiters and where people form relationships with their traffickers. So to think about how we expect people to be locked up or in chains, then imagine it's their family members, people they've grown up with and trusted their entire lives. So a lot of times when it's beyond your home and your family, there's other places that there's most likely to be recruitment. This includes social media and school and popular meeting places or places where they consider home but are also facing vulnerability factors. So whether that's group homes or detention centers, shelters, foster cares, places where there might be unstable living situations or have previously experienced violence in some other way. Someone might be more at risk if they have run away or been in the juvenile justice system or are undocumented or facing poverty or economic need. A few characteristics of a trafficker themselves, the person causing this harm, often use tools of power and control to gain access to these people. It might look like isolation or grooming, debt bondage or violence. A lot of these things can look like isolating that person, not letting them see their friends or family, or slowly convincing them that they're actually against the person. Like, oh, don't hang out with your friend. They're against our relationship. They're against what's best for you. They may speak for that person. You see two people together and they always look to their partner to answer the question, even when they're directly asked. But what we really want to emphasize is that traffickers can look like anything. They may be any age, race, gender. They might be incredibly charming. They might be super friendly. They might not be that scary guy with the white van. It can look like anything. And it could be a close friend or relative. And the stats show that it often is. Here we have a long list of potential signs. There's a lot of potential indicators beyond just signs of abuse, physical or emotional or mental. But it also might look like not being sure where they're staying, or kind of not having a sense of it, not feeling like they can come and go freely, that they are being controlled, and having that force, fraud, or coercion, and really having that lack of control, not being in control of their money, of their time, of their knowledge of their whereabouts. And they may have really unexpected, inconsistent behaviors. It might feel like they're lying to you, not telling the truth. Maybe it feels like they don't know exactly what's going on with their story. They may have a lot of mental health challenges, anxiety, depression, paranoia, all of these things as a result of this dynamic. Again, this is not an all-encompassing list, and some of these things might be present in someone you know, and it not immediately mean that trafficking is happening. At the same time, we look for patterns, and we look for a variety of these things on these lists. So we like to make sure that we give a long list, because there's a lot of things out there that might be signs of human trafficking or some kind of exploitation of some kind. Now, once we recognize it's happening, we have to decide how are we going to respond if a loved one or someone we know, or even someone we interact with briefly, decides to share this information with us. First of all, we want to make sure we are listening and validating their experience. We listen without judgment and be supportive of their experience, and recognize that it takes a lot of bravery to bring it up if they're in a space that's being manipulated to keep this quiet. And we really emphasize, even when we're talking to professionals, to offer resources, not advice. Because if we have the option to refer people to experts, we really want to do that. We give lots of resources at the end of how to go about that and who to refer them to make sure that we have support systems and support people in the best way possible. A few things we do like to encourage is really not to push people to criticize the trafficker or their partner, because oftentimes, especially if they're in a relationship with that person, they may still feel a lot of defensiveness around that partner. I like to think of it as a dynamic of, oh, well, I can be mean to my sibling, but you can't. So now imagine this is the person who is financially supporting them and has been good to them in certain ways. Even if they can recognize abuse or trafficking is happening, they might still be defensive of other people bringing criticism on them. So we really emphasize offering the resources, turning to people who know how to speak about it, know how to kind of get through to them and hear the experiences that they're going through. And then finally, and most importantly, we want to make sure that even as we're trying to support our friends and family, we maintain our own boundaries, both emotionally and physically, and making sure that we're not overstepping things that should go to law enforcement. So what if we're not sure? We kind of suspect, we kind of know what to recognize now, we've seen the signs. What do we do if we're not sure and they're not really bringing it up? Well, we can make sure that we are a safe space and our friend knows that. We keep this open line of communication and make sure we know that they're available to talk. Maybe they pick a safe word and that when they say that word, they're looking for help. Maybe even if they're not willing to talk about it, they've kind of made some suggestions. This kind of starts that conversation, and learn more about what makes it safe for them. Because a lot of times when they're in these situations where their autonomy has been taken away, we really want to do our best to empower them to make their own choices of when and where they go to get advice. There's a few questions we can ask, whether do you feel comfortable leaving your job if you want to? Have you been hurt or threatened if you tried to leave, where do you sleep at night, and do you have access to your passports and identification information? These are just a few questions. Again, there are many more, but just a reminder. And then, like we said in the last few slides, that we really want to emphasize referring people to resources, but we also recognize there's a lot of reasons why people might not report. There's a lot of shame and guilt associated with experiencing any kind of abuse and really feeling like people might not believe them. They may fear retaliation from their trafficker or have love for them at the same time. A lot of these might come from trauma bonds, but also physical or mental disabilities or lack of financial resources. Our organization does a lot of safety planning, so even before someone decides to leave, can work through all of those steps to remove barriers in order to make it easier, whether someone has a pet and they really don't want to leave that pet in the home with their abuser or their trafficker. We make sure that we can remove some of those barriers, make sure we coordinate that ahead of time so that people feel more and more capable of making the choice to leave. When we refer, these are the places that we recommend. Here on this left side, we have human trafficking specific resources. Some of these are based in Worcester, but all serve the Worcester County area in general, including Southbridge. So first we have Safe Exit Initiative in Worcester, previously known as LIFT, and Ready Inspire Act, which I believe is based out of Framingham, but they serve this area as well. And then a few national resources, including the National Human Trafficking Hotline and Homeland Security Investigation Tip Line. On the right, we have the organizations like New Hope and the YWCA that provide domestic violence resources, because a lot of times there is crossover between human trafficking and domestic violence, especially when we recognize that oftentimes human trafficking happens within families. We also want to recognize sexual violence resources that include Pathways for Change and Wayside Valley Rape Crisis Program. Pathways for Change is based out of Worcester, and Wayside Valley Rape Crisis Program is based out of Milford, but they both serve this area. So oftentimes broaching the subject can be kind of tough, so we have a few prompts. I think these are great resources because it just kind of gets the conversation going. So if someone brings some information to you, you could say, "Thank you for trusting me with this. I know some folks at New Hope, and I really think they can help you." Or, "This must be a lot to handle alone. Would you allow me to give them your number?" Or, "Can we call that resource together?" There's like 3 different ways that we can kind of empower them to make their own choices, share that information with the organization itself, or do it together. And depending on the person, it depends on what might be most helpful for them, and what might actually make them take that step to reach out and get help. We listed New Hope as one of those people to refer to. Most importantly, we want to highlight our hotline, which is our intake to all of our services in general. This is a great place to not only send survivors, but also people supporting survivors. So if someone you know is experiencing human trafficking and you're not sure how to handle it, our helpline is still a resource for friends and family. With the crossover with human trafficking beyond domestic violence services, we also have shelters and safe plan advocates who are based in our courts that provide services when someone goes about getting a restraining or a prevention order, and they will be with that person and walk through the entire process as much as that person chooses or chooses not to have them present. We have a variety of other programs that are listed here, including counseling and supervised visitation for non-custodial parents, but I just wanted to highlight a few that really cross over when we're with survivors of human trafficking. These are the communities we serve. I just want to highlight it, make sure it's there. People are welcome to take a closer look. And finally, and kind of a happier note, even as we've done the recognize, respond, refer model, we know what to happen if we're experiencing it or see someone experiencing it. Most importantly, and part of why I'm here today, is to talk about prevention. Friends and family are the top access point for help, followed by law enforcement. So even as we see that friends and family might be where a lot of this originates, it's also where people go to seek for help. So it's great for us to educate and empower people to support their friends and family, because we know that that's where people go first. We can all help to make foster a more connected community, and part of it is knowing what to look for and how to help, and that's what we're here doing now. Our hotline is listed. It is 1-800-3 4673-HOPE, so 4673 are those last numbers. And we have flyers here at the library. We do have a Southbridge office, but it's by appointment only. Our Attleboro office is our only walk-in office, so we have an office in Worcester and then here in Southbridge. Both are by appointment only, but the hotline will connect you to any resources. And so if someone wanted to come see a counselor in person here in Southbridge, that is definitely an option. Thank you all, and feel free to reach out to New Hope if you have any questions. Thank you.